there are things that surprise even me. There's a bunch of amazing facts out there you weren't aware of. Let me tell you some of them. I'm the useless guy. And here I am with amazing facts you didn't know.
So many questions. Why is the world spinning? Why is the moon keeping its orbit? Can rockets fly backwards? The facts you didn't know you needed. The Useless Show.
A sentence like, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," isn't just sharing information, it's actually doing something. That's the core idea behind speech act theory, a branch of pragmatics that looks at how language can perform actions. Introduced by philosophers like J.L. Austin and later John Searle, this theory explains how saying things like promises, apologies, or commands isn't just about words, but about doing something through them. If you measure a quantum system constantly, you can actually freeze its state. This strange effect is called the quantum Zeno effect, named after the philosopher Zeno, who imagined paradoxes where motion seems impossible. In quantum physics, the act of observation interferes with the system. So if you keep checking a particle fast enough, it stops evolving, kind of like watching a pot so closely that it literally never boils. In the late 1500s, astronomer Tycho Brahe proposed a model of the solar system that tried to keep everyone happy. Known as the Tychonic system, it placed Earth at the center, but let the other planets orbit the Sun, which in turn orbited Earth. It was an attempt to merge the observational accuracy of Copernicus with the philosophical comfort of geocentrism, especially before telescopes confirmed otherwise. 1 Pascal may not feel like much. It's the pressure of 1 Newton per square meter. But stack up enough of them, and you've got hurricanes or deep-sea crushing forces. Named after Blaise Pascal, the unit is a standard in physics and engineering. A tire, for instance, is often inflated to about 200,000 pascals. So, while one is tiny, they add up fast in real-world pressure. When solving a crystal's structure using X-ray diffraction, scientists hit a wall called the phase problem. The Patterson function helps get around it. Named after Arthur Lindo Patterson in 1934, this mathematical tool reveals distances between atoms without needing exact phase data. It's like seeing footprints in snow. Even if you didn't watch someone walk, you can guess how far apart their steps were. The helical model of communication suggests that communication isn't a straight line. It's more like a spiral. Proposed by Frank Dance in 1967, the model shows how conversations build over time, with each interaction adding a twist to the helix. So, your chats with a friend aren't just exchanges. They're connected layers, shaped by everything you've already said and everything still unsaid. The Beaufort scale turns wind into numbers you can actually see. Created by Admiral Francis Beaufort in 1805, it links wind speed to visual effects, from calm seas with smooth, glassy water to hurricane with waves over 14 meters high. A strong breeze point, for example, might snap twigs off trees. It's a practical system sailors and meteorologists still use to describe weather without needing instruments. A phononic crystal is a man-made material designed to control sound. Its internal structure has a repeating pattern that affects how vibrations, like sound waves, move through it. That's similar to how photonic crystals control light. These materials can block, bend, or trap sound in ways that natural materials can't, making them useful in soundproofing, ultrasound imaging, or even cloaking devices. Groupthink happens when a group values harmony so much it ends up making bad decisions. Coined by Irving Janis in 1972, the idea explains how people might ignore warning signs or silence doubts just to keep everyone happy. It's been used to analyze major failures, like the Bay of Pigs invasion. In groupthink, it's not stupidity. It's too much agreement that causes the damage. Bell's theorem, published in 1964 by physicist John Bell, draws a bold line between classical physics and quantum mechanics. It shows that no local theory, where objects are only affected by nearby things, can explain the strange correlations predicted by quantum entanglement. In other words, quantum particles seem to know about each other instantly, even when separated, challenging our ideas of space, time, and realism. A Bose-Einstein condensate is what happens when matter gets extremely cold, just a whisper above absolute zero. Predicted by Satyendra Nath Bose and Albert Einstein, and first made in 1995, this state causes a group of bosons to occupy the same quantum state, behaving as one big quantum particle. It's as if atoms, usually independent, suddenly march in lockstep, blurring the line between particles and waves. Ukalamba Drakensberg Park in South Africa is both a natural wonder and a cultural archive. Stretching across the Drakensberg Mountains, it holds dramatic peaks and valleys, but also over 35,000 sandrock art images, some thousands of years old. Named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2000, the park's name means Barrier of Spears in Zulu, echoing its striking landscape and long human history. In Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, there's a petroglyph nicknamed the Hand of God. It shows a crescent moon, a handprint, and a starburst, possibly a depiction of the supernova from July 1054 CE, which created the Crab Nebula. Chinese astronomers recorded it at the time, and it was visible in daylight for weeks. The carving suggests indigenous people might have witnessed it too, etched into stone. The Phillips head screw wasn't just built for grip, it was built to slip. Designed by Henry F. Phillips in the 1930s, it was made so that the driver cams out, or slips free when too much torque is applied. That might seem like a flaw, but it actually prevents over-tightening and damage during automated assembly, especially useful in car manufacturing, where speed and consistency are key. That new car smell isn't a single scent. It's a cocktail of over 50 volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. These come from glues, plastics, sealants, and fabrics, all slowly releasing chemicals into the air as the car ages. Compounds like toluene and formaldehyde contribute to the smell. Some people find it nostalgic, others headache-inducing. Either way, it's not really fresh, it's chemistry at work. When high winds pass through the sidewalk slats of the Golden Gate Bridge, the bridge actually hums. It's not a metaphor. It's an eerie musical tone caused by air vibrating through the railings after a retrofit in 2020. The sound can be heard miles away and has a distinct pitch, like a giant tuning fork in the fog. Engineers are still exploring ways to quiet it down. A zon is a narrow, sea-cut inlet carved into cliffs, usually found on rugged coastlines like Cornwall or Western Wales. These steep-sided gullies form as waves erode cracks in the rock, gradually expanding them into deep channels. Some are dramatic enough to swallow small boats, while others barely fit a kayak. The word zon itself comes from Cornish, capturing both the geography and its maritime roots. The Dresselhaus effect shows up in certain crystals, where the interaction between an electron's spin and its motion causes energy levels to split. This phenomenon plays a major role in spintronics, a field that uses electron spin to store or transfer information. So instead of just charging, you're using spin like a tiny compass. The weapons effect is a psychological finding where just seeing a weapon can increase aggressive behavior. First demonstrated in a 1967 study by Leonard Berkowitz and Anthony LePage, participants exposed to guns acted more aggressively than those who weren't. It doesn't mean everyone becomes violent, but it suggests that weapons can trigger hostile associations, subtly influencing how people think and act in tense moments. The nocebo effect is the darker cousin of the placebo. If you expect a harmless pill to cause nausea, you might start feeling sick, just because you thought you would. It's a psychological response where negative expectations cause real symptoms. The term nocebo, Latin for I shall harm, was coined in the 1960s, and it shows how belief itself can shape the experience of pain or illness. The marshmallow test, first run by Walter Mischel in the 1960s, studied how kids handle delayed gratification. A child was offered one marshmallow now, or two if they could wait alone for about 15 minutes. Follow-up studies found that kids who waited often had better life outcomes later. But more recent research suggests it's not just willpower. Things like trust, socioeconomic status, and environment also matter a lot. Gregson maxims are the unspoken rules we usually follow in conversation. Philosopher H.P. Grice outlined 4 in the 1970s. Quality, be truthful. Quantity, be informative but not too much. Relation, be relevant. And manner, be clear. When people break these, like exaggerating or going off topic, we often pick up on it instantly. These maxims help make conversation feel natural, even if we've never thought about them before. Before pitch was standardized, musicians had a problem. The note A wasn't always the same. In the 1700s and 1800s, it could vary wildly, sometimes as low as 392 Hz. Other times above 450 Hz. That's almost a major third apart, enough to make ensemble playing across cities very tricky. Today, Concert A is set at 440 Hz, but even now, some orchestras still prefer a slightly higher pitch. In 9 CE, deep within the dense woods of the Teutoburg forest, 3 Roman legions led by Publius Quinctilius Varus were ambushed by Germanic tribes under a chieftain named Arminius. Over the course of several days, around 15,000 Roman soldiers were wiped out in a brutal, rain-soaked trap. The defeat was so complete that Rome abandoned its plans to expand across the Rhine, an imperial retreat rarely seen in its history. The Peloponnesian War was a long and bitter conflict between Athens and Sparta that reshaped ancient Greece. From 431 to 404 BCE, the Athenian-led Delian League fought the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League in a clash of ideologies, naval power and democracy versus land power and oligarchy. Thucydides, who lived through it, chronicled the war, which ended in Athens' defeat and ushered in a decline of classical Greek power. The karuka was a heavy iron-tipped plow that transformed European agriculture in the Middle Ages. Appearing in the 9th century, it had large wheels and a mold board that turned over thick, clay-rich soils, especially in northern Europe, where earlier wooden plows failed. It required teams of oxen, but in return, it allowed deeper, more efficient farming. Villages even reorganized their land around it, creating long, narrow fields. The Dilbert Principle is a satirical twist on office life, coined by cartoonist Scott Adams in the 1990s. It suggests that companies tend to promote their least competent workers into management, not because they're leadership material, but because they're less likely to cause harm there. While meant as humor, it struck a chord with many office workers who'd seen baffling promotions firsthand. Sometimes, satire hits uncomfortably close. The gambler's fallacy is the mistaken belief that past random events affect future ones. For example, if a coin lands on heads 5 times in a row, some might think tails is due next. But the odds haven't changed. It's still 50-50. This cognitive bias can lead gamblers to make risky bets, misreading patterns where none exist, and assuming luck has a memory it simply doesn't. The smell of an old book comes from chemistry, not nostalgia. As paper ages, its cellulose and lignin begin to break down, releasing aromatic compounds like vanillin, benzaldehyde, and ethyl hexanoate. Together, they create that warm, slightly sweet scent often compared to vanilla or almonds. Environmental conditions like humidity or sunlight speed up the process, meaning your favorite musty library scent is really a slow kind of decay. Helsinki, Finland's capital, is a city where modern Nordic design meets icy seascapes. Officially founded in 1550 by Swedish King Gustav I, it sits on the edge of the Baltic Sea and stretches across more than 300 islands. Known for landmarks like the Helsinki Cathedral and the bold geometry of Alvar Aalto's architecture, the city balances classical European roots with minimalist modern aesthetics, and a lot of winter light shows. Denisova Cave sits in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia and holds a surprising chapter of human history. In 2008, a tiny finger bone found there revealed a previously unknown group of ancient humans, the Denisovans. Genetic analysis showed they were distinct from both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, yet interbred with both. The cave, with its deep archaeological layers, has become a key site for understanding human evolution. The Library of Alexandria, one of the most famous libraries of the ancient world, reportedly had a policy that any ship docking in its harbor had to surrender its scrolls. These were copied by scribes, and the originals were kept, while the copies were returned to the owners. Whether fully true or not, the story reflects the library's mission, to gather all human knowledge, even by slightly sneaky means. The Poitevin-Le-Chatelier effect is an odd behavior in certain metals like aluminum or steel when stretched. Under specific temperatures and strain rates, the metal doesn't deform smoothly. It jerks and forms visible bands. Discovered in the early 20th century, the effect is caused by interactions between dislocations and diffusing atoms. It's a problem in manufacturing because it makes metal weaker and harder to predict during shaping. Chauvet Cave, hidden in the cliffs of southern France, contains some of the oldest and most detailed cave art ever discovered. Dating back over 30,000 years, the walls show lions, rhinoceroses, and bears drawn with remarkable shading and motion. Unlike many later caves, Chauvet's paintings are vivid and complex, as if the artist already knew techniques we'd call advanced. The cave remained sealed for millennia, preserving it almost untouched. Tempering is a heat treatment process that makes steel tougher, less brittle, more durable. After steel is hardened by rapid cooling, it can become too hard and prone to cracking. Tempering involves reheating it to a lower temperature, then cooling it again. This process reduces internal stress while maintaining strength. You'll find tempered steel in tools, knives, and structural parts where both hardness and resilience are needed. The butterfly effect, popularized in chaos theory, describes how tiny changes in initial conditions can lead to drastically different outcomes. The metaphor, where a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and triggers a tornado in Texas, illustrates how complex systems like weather or ecosystems are incredibly sensitive. The concept emerged from meteorologist Edward Lorenz's work in the 1960s, showing that even small rounding errors in data could change a forecast entirely. The epicycle was a clever workaround in ancient astronomy. To explain why planets sometimes appeared to move backward in the sky, Ptolemy proposed that they moved in small circles, epicycles, while also orbiting Earth on larger circles, deferents. It was mathematically useful but physically incorrect. The model lasted over 1,000 years until Copernicus and Kepler redefined planetary motion with ellipses and heliocentrism. The Alcubierre drive is a speculative idea from theoretical physics suggesting a way to travel faster than light, without breaking the laws of relativity. Proposed in 1994 by physicist Miguel Alcubierre, the concept involves compressing space in front of a ship and expanding it behind, like surfing a wave of space-time. It would require exotic matter with negative energy, which has never been found, making the drive purely hypothetical for now. Karate is a martial art that developed in the Ryukyu Kingdom, now Okinawa, Japan, under Chinese influence. Originally shaped by native fighting systems and imported techniques, it evolved into a striking art emphasizing punches, kicks, and open-hand techniques. By the 20th century, karate had spread to mainland Japan and then globally. Its name means empty hand, highlighting its emphasis on unarmed self-defense and disciplined movement. Altamira is a cave in northern Spain, known for its vivid prehistoric paintings. Discovered in the 19th century, the site features bison, deer, and mysterious symbols painted over 20,000 years ago by Paleolithic artists. The ceiling's polychrome bison are so lifelike that early skeptics dismissed them as forgeries, but radiocarbon dating proved otherwise. These were the real expressions of Ice Age humans, preserved in darkness for millennia. During the Apollo missions, astronauts performed something called the barbecue roll. It sounds like lunch, but it was a slow rotation of the spacecraft to evenly distribute solar heat. Without it, one side would overheat while the other froze. By spinning the craft like a rotisserie chicken, once every 20 minutes or so, they avoided dangerous temperature differences. It was one of many quiet, essential maneuvers that kept astronauts alive. The magic bullet theory suggests that mass media messages are directly absorbed by audiences without question, like a bullet hitting its target. Popular in the early 20th century, this model assumed the public was passive and easily influenced, especially during times like World War I. Later theories became more nuanced, but the idea lingered that one message, delivered clearly enough, could shape thoughts or behavior with near-instant impact. A carbon nanotube is a cylinder made entirely of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal lattice, with a diameter often just a few nanometers wide. Discovered in the early 1990s, these structures are incredibly strong, light, and conductive, properties that make them useful in electronics, materials science, and medicine. Imagine something stronger than steel, lighter than plastic, and capable of conducting electricity better than copper, all in a microscopic tube. Exotic matter is the name given to any theoretical form of matter that breaks the usual rules, like having negative mass or defying known energy conditions. It's not antimatter or dark matter, but something even stranger. Some versions appear in speculative physics ideas, like wormholes or warp drives, where negative energy is needed to bend space. None of it has been confirmed in labs, but it remains mathematically possible. Venice rests on millions of wooden piles, mostly alder, driven deep into the muddy lagoon floor. Laid down as early as the 5th century, these piles supported stone foundations above the waterline. Surprisingly, the wood hasn't rotted because it's underwater and cut off from oxygen, which bacteria need to survive. Over time, minerals in the water petrified the wood, turning Venice's invisible skeleton into something closer to stone. Metamaterials are engineered materials with properties not found in nature. Their structure, not just their composition, controls how they interact with waves, like light, sound, or radio. Some can bend light backward, creating the illusion of invisibility. Others can focus electromagnetic waves in ways normal materials can't. It's not science fiction. It's physics with very precise geometry, often on the scale of micrometers or nanometers. Loop quantum gravity is a theoretical attempt to bridge two major theories of physics: general relativity and quantum mechanics. Instead of treating space as a smooth fabric, it suggests that space itself is made of tiny, discrete loops, kind of like a woven net. These loops form a granular structure of space-time at the Planck scale, far too small to observe directly, but mathematically consistent with both gravity and quantum theory. Serra da Capivara National Park in northeastern Brazil is famous for its dramatic rock formations and for some of the oldest known prehistoric rock art in the Americas. The park contains over 1,000 archaeological sites, including wall paintings that may be up to 25,000 years old. Designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1991, it also protects a rare patch of dry forest and wildlife unique to the Caatinga biome. Scrimshaw is the art of engraving on bone or ivory, traditionally done by sailors, especially whalers, during the 18th and 19th centuries. Using simple tools like sail needles and pocket knives, they carved intricate scenes on whale teeth, walrus tusks, or bones. Many depicted ships, sea monsters, or loved ones back home. Scrimshaw was both a creative outlet and a way to pass long, monotonous months at sea. In a Roman city, the Forum was more than just a plaza. It was the beating heart of public life. Located at the center of town, it served as a marketplace, courtroom, religious hub, and political stage. Citizens gathered here to hear speeches, vote, or conduct business. The Roman Forum in particular, nestled between the Palatine and Capitoline Hills, became a template for civic design for centuries. The Pockels effect describes how the refractive index of a material changes when you apply an electric field. In simpler terms, it means you can bend or slow light by running a voltage through the right kind of crystal. This effect, discovered by Friedrich Pockels in the late 19th century, is crucial in modern optics, especially in devices like modulators that control laser beams in telecommunications. The appeal to probability is a logical fallacy where someone assumes that because something can happen, it definitely will. For instance, saying, "I might win the lottery, so I'm quitting my job," falls into this trap. It confuses possibility with certainty, often leading to decisions based more on hope than on evidence. It's common in everyday thinking, and just as common in poor planning. The Boltzmann equation describes how particles in a fluid behave statistically over time. It links the motion of a single particle to the complex collisions happening between pairs of particles. Developed by Ludwig Boltzmann in the 1870s, the equation is central to kinetic theory. It helps explain how gases flow, mix, or transfer heat. Though built on probability, it underpins many everyday physical processes, from engines to weather systems. Bedbugs reproduce in a way called traumatic insemination, and it's about as pleasant as it sounds. Instead of mating through the female's reproductive tract, the male pierces her abdomen with his needle-like organ and injects sperm directly into her body cavity. The sperm then migrates to the ovaries. It's brutal, biologically costly, and highly effective. Nature, it seems, doesn't always prioritize comfort. Gonite is a rare, zinc-rich mineral in the spinel group, often found in metamorphic rocks. It typically forms as dark green or bluish octahedral crystals, and it can be used as a minor gemstone. Discovered in Sweden and named after chemist Johann Gottlieb Gahn, it's chemically ZnAl2O4. Gonite isn't common, but when it appears, it's often a sign of high-temperature geological processes underground. The affect heuristic is a mental shortcut where emotions drive decision-making more than logic. If something feels good or bad instantly, we're more likely to judge it quickly, whether or not the reasoning holds up. For example, if you like a politician, you might overlook their flaws. Or if a food label seems scary, you might avoid it without understanding what it actually means. Feelings, in this case, steer the facts. In ancient Sparta, the Cryptia was a secretive institution where select young men were sent to stalk the countryside and intimidate or kill rebellious helots, the enslaved majority. Part rite of passage, part state terror. It served both to train warriors and control the population. The exact details remain debated, but ancient sources describe it as a kind of sanctioned violence that helped maintain Spartan dominance through fear. Shanidar Cave, nestled in the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq, contains the remains of Neanderthals who lived around 35,000 to 65,000 years ago. Excavations revealed not just bones, but clues to behavior. One skeleton appeared to be buried with flowers, hinting at ritual or care. Another showed signs of disability and long-term survival, suggesting group support. It's one of the most humanizing glimpses into Neanderthal life ever discovered. The Seebeck effect is what happens when you join two different conductors and create a temperature difference between them. A voltage is generated. This phenomenon, discovered by Thomas Johann Seebeck in 1821, forms the basis of thermocouples, which measure temperature by converting heat into electricity. It's also used in thermoelectric generators, which can power small devices using nothing more than heat gradients, like waste heat from engines. The mathematical constant A, approximately 2.718, first emerged in studies of compound interest in the 17th century. Jacob Bernoulli noticed it when calculating what happens when interest is compounded infinitely often. It later became fundamental in calculus, especially in growth and decay models. Doggerland was a stretch of land that once connected Britain to mainland Europe during and after the last ice age. Around 8,000 years ago, as sea levels rose, this vast lowland plain was slowly swallowed by the North Sea. Archaeologists have found traces of tools, bones, and settlements on the seabed, evidence of a lost Mesolithic world where people hunted, fished, and walked from what's now Norfolk to the Netherlands. Zero-sum bias is the belief that one person's gain must be another's loss, even in situations where mutual benefit is possible. For example, someone might think a co-worker's raise means less money for everyone else, even if the budget allows for both. It's a flawed way of viewing competition, rooted in limited resource thinking. The bias often pops up in politics, economics, or arguments about fairness. Skopje, the capital of North Macedonia, underwent a massive and controversial redesign in the early 21st century, known as Skopje 2014. The project filled the city with neoclassical facades, grand statues, and monumental architecture, intended to evoke a historical identity. Critics said it felt artificial and out of place, while supporters called it national pride. Either way, Skopje's skyline became one of Europe's most visually jarring blends of old and new. Cherry-picking is when someone selects only the evidence that supports their argument while ignoring everything that doesn't. It's a common logical fallacy in debates, media, and even science. For example, pointing to a single cold day as proof that climate change isn't real ignores the broader data. It's not about lying, just being very selective with the truth, which can be just as misleading. Bell's spaceship paradox is a thought experiment that explores how special relativity affects objects in motion. Imagine two identical spaceships connected by a string, accelerating at the same rate. Intuitively, the string should remain taut, but due to Lorentz contraction, it breaks. Shows that relativistic effects like contraction aren't just abstract, they have real physical consequences. Whale semimetals are exotic materials where electrons behave like whale fermions, massless, high-speed particles predicted by quantum field theory. In these materials, electrons follow paths that resemble twisted cones in momentum space, leading to unusual effects like high conductivity and surface states called Fermi arcs. Whale semimetals offer a solid-state glimpse into particle physics and may have future applications in electronics and quantum computing. The ostrich effect is the tendency to avoid or ignore unpleasant information, just like the mythical idea of an ostrich burying its head in the sand. People might skip checking their bank accounts after overspending, or avoid health news when symptoms appear. The term highlights how we cope with anxiety by pretending problems don't exist, even when facing them would actually be more useful in the long run. Coppicing is an ancient method of managing trees by cutting them near the base, prompting new shoots to grow. Used for thousands of years across Europe, it turns a single tree into a source of repeated harvests, ideal for firewood, fencing, and tool handles. Species like hazel and willow respond particularly well. It's low-tech, sustainable, and surprisingly efficient, with coppice trees often outliving those left to grow naturally. Eutresis is an archaeological site in Boeotia, central Greece, known for its long history stretching back to the Bronze Age. Excavations have uncovered Mycenaean tombs, Cyclopean walls, and pottery dating as early as 2000 BCE. Mentioned in Homer's Iliad as a city that sent ships to Troy, Eutresis played a quiet but steady role in early Greek development, nestled in the fertile valley near modern Leuctra. The ortolan is a small bunting native to Europe, once at the center of a French culinary ritual both elaborate and controversial. Traditionally, the bird was captured, fattened in darkness, and drowned in Armagnac before being roasted and eaten whole under a napkin, possibly to hide the shame. Though considered a delicacy, the practice is now banned due to the bird's protected status and widespread ethical concerns. The ideomotor phenomenon describes how people can make movements without consciously deciding to, tiny muscle actions triggered by thoughts or suggestions. It's the force behind things like Ouija boards or dowsing rods, where the user believes the object is moving on its own. In reality, the unconscious mind is gently guiding the motion. It's subtle enough to feel mysterious, but well documented in psychology. The Solutrean hypothesis suggests that Stone Age Europeans may have crossed the Atlantic and contributed to the early population of North America. Based on similarities between Solutrean stone tools in Europe and Clovis points in America, it proposes a migration around 20,000 years ago. However, mainstream archaeology rejects it due to a lack of genetic and archaeological evidence, and concerns about its speculative foundation. The Penrose process, proposed by physicist Roger Penrose in 1969, describes how energy might be extracted from a rotating black hole. By sending an object into the black hole's ergosphere and having it split, one part falls in while the other escapes with more energy than it started with. Though still theoretical, the idea helped lay the groundwork for later studies of black hole thermodynamics and astrophysical jets. Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, spans 14 islands where Lake Mälaren meets the Baltic Sea. Settled since the 13th century, it's known for its preserved old town, Gamla Stan, with cobblestone streets and medieval buildings. The city blends historic charm with Scandinavian design and features waterways, royal palaces, and museums like the Vasa, which houses a nearly intact 17th century warship raised from the harbor. Warsaw, the capital of Poland, was nearly wiped off the map during World War II. After the failed Warsaw Uprising in 1944, German forces systematically destroyed over 85% of the city. What stands today is largely a careful reconstruction, particularly the Old Town, rebuilt brick by brick using pre-war paintings and plans. It's one of the most ambitious urban restorations in modern history. The Roche limit is the minimum distance a celestial body, held together only by its own gravity, can orbit a larger body without being torn apart by tidal forces. Inside this limit, gravitational differences across the smaller object become too strong, and it disintegrates, possibly forming rings as with Saturn. The concept helps explain why large moons don't form too close to their planets. The Flynn effect is the observed rise in average IQ scores over the 20th century, noted in many countries. Named after James R. Flynn, who studied the trend, it suggests that environmental factors like education, nutrition, and complexity of daily life may improve cognitive performance over time. Interestingly, the effect appears to be plateauing, or even reversing, in some regions in the 21st century. A standard candle in astronomy is an object whose intrinsic brightness is known, allowing astronomers to calculate its distance by comparing how bright it appears from Earth. Type 11A supernovae are the most famous example, used to measure the expansion of the universe. Because their luminosity is consistent, they act like cosmic yardsticks stretched across billions of light years. King Inne of Wessex issued one of the earliest known Anglo-Saxon law codes around 694 AD. Among its detailed rules were fines for injuring a Welshman, with the amount depending on the victim's social status, whether he was free or of higher rank. These laws reflect the complex interactions between Anglo-Saxons and neighboring peoples, and the early attempt to codify social hierarchies under royal authority. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War in 1848. Under its terms, Mexico ceded a massive swath of territory to the United States, including present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of several other states. In return, the U.S. paid $15 million. The treaty redrew borders dramatically and remains a turning point in both countries' histories, setting the stage for Western expansion. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon is the feeling that once you learn something new, like a word, phrase, or idea, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere. It's a cognitive bias combining selective attention and confirmation bias. You weren't noticing it before, but now your brain flags it. The effect is named after a German terrorist group, oddly enough, because someone reportedly first noticed it that way. The just world hypothesis is a mental shortcut that leads people to believe the world is fair, that good actions bring rewards and bad ones bring punishment. It's comforting, but it can lead to blaming victims for their misfortunes, assuming they somehow deserved what happened. Arbitrage is when traders exploit price differences in different markets to make a risk-free profit. For example, if gold sells for slightly less in London than in New York, a trader might buy it in one place and sell it in the other, pocketing the margin. High-frequency trading firms use powerful algorithms to spot these tiny gaps. Though the profit per trade is small, the volume makes it lucrative. The St. Scholastica Day riot broke out in Oxford in 1355 after 2 university students complained about bad wine in a tavern. The quarrel turned violent, drawing in townspeople and students in a 2-day brawl that left nearly 100 people dead. The university was held responsible, and for centuries after, Oxford annually apologized to the town. The Tableau économique, published by François Quesnay in 1758, was the first known attempt to describe an entire economy in analytical terms. Quesnay, a physician and economist in the French court, portrayed economic flows like blood circulating in the body. His model emphasized agriculture as the primary source of wealth, a view later challenged, but it laid a foundation for classical economics and national accounting. The Brillouin zone is a key concept in solid-state physics. It's a uniquely defined cell in reciprocal space, essentially a map of wave behavior in a crystal lattice. These zones help explain the properties of electrons in solids, such as conductivity and band gaps. If real space is where atoms sit, reciprocal space is where their vibrations and energy states are charted. It's abstract but critical to modern electronics. The Hill sphere is the region around a planet or moon, where its gravity dominates over that of a more massive body, like a star. Inside this zone, satellites can orbit stably. Earth's Hill sphere stretches about 1.5 million kilometers, beyond which the sun's pull takes over. Understanding it is crucial when predicting satellite paths or planning space missions that involve multiple gravitational influences. The illusory truth effect is the tendency to believe a statement is true simply because it's been repeated often. First identified in the 1970s, it shows how familiarity can override factual accuracy. Even if a claim is false, hearing it multiple times makes it feel more believable. It's one reason misinformation can spread so effectively, especially in politics and advertising. The prosecutor's fallacy is a misinterpretation of statistical evidence in court, especially around probabilities. It often involves assuming that a rare match, like a DNA profile, means a person must be guilty without considering the broader context. For example, if a DNA test has a 1 in a million chance of matching randomly, and there are 10 million people in a city, there could still be 10 possible matches. Mental accounting is the habit of mentally dividing money into different buckets based on its source or intended use. For example, someone might splurge with a tax refund but pinch pennies with their paycheck, even though both are technically the same money. This bias helps people manage finances intuitively, but can also lead to irrational spending decisions, like treating found money as less valuable. Crown shyness is a phenomenon where the upper canopies of certain tree species grow close but never touch, creating visible gaps in the forest canopy. It's observed in species like the black mangrove and eucalyptus and may reduce the spread of disease or damage from branches clashing in the wind. The exact cause isn't fully agreed upon, but the effect is striking, like trees politely giving each other space. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BCE in ancient Babylon, assigned punishments based on social class. For instance, Injuring a nobleman brought a harsher penalty than harming a commoner. This legal distinction was carved directly into a tall stone stele, emphasizing that justice wasn't blind. It was ranked. The Kirk effect refers to a sharp performance drop in bipolar junction transistors at high current levels. As current increases, the internal electric field in the base region changes, reducing how effectively the device can control the flow of charge. It's a limitation that engineers must account for in circuit design, especially when pushing the limits of speed or power in semiconductor devices. Obliquity is the tilt of a planet's rotational axis relative to its orbital plane. Earth's obliquity is about 23.5 degrees, and it's what gives us seasons. A higher tilt would mean more extreme seasons, a lower tilt, milder ones. Over thousands of years, Earth's tilt slowly shifts, affecting long-term climate cycles, part of what drives ice ages and warm periods. Brown dwarfs are objects too big to be planets, but too small to ignite sustained hydrogen fusion like stars. With masses between about 13 and 80 times that of Jupiter, they form similarly to stars but don't shine as brightly. They glow faintly in infrared and often lurk undetected in space. Think of them as failed stars, or massive planets that didn't quite make the cut. The Kirk session was the lowest court in the Scottish legal system, but unlike modern courts, it was run by the local church. Active from the 16th to the 19th centuries, it focused not on crime as we know it, but on enforcing moral and religious discipline, things like Sabbath breaking, drunkenness, or scandalous conduct. It was a kind of spiritual small claims court, keeping watch over the soul of the parish. Nganga is an archaeological site located in the Democratic Republic of Congo, offering insights into the ancient cultures of Central Africa. Excavations have uncovered iron smelting furnaces, pottery, and burial sites, dating back over 1,000 years. Though not widely known outside academic circles, Nganga contributes to the broader understanding of early African metallurgy and trade networks, which were more complex and far-reaching than once assumed. The Kirkendall effect describes how two metals can actually cause their shared boundary to shift when they diffuse at different rates. First observed in the 1940s using marker experiments with brass and copper, it's a phenomenon where atoms from one metal migrate faster than those of the other. The sextant is a navigational tool that helped sailors determine their latitude at sea by measuring the angle between the horizon and a celestial body object, usually the sun or a star. Invented in the 18th century, it uses a system of mirrors to allow precise readings of angular distances. Before GPS, this was your best bet for not missing land entirely, or worse, discovering a new continent by accident. A red dwarf is the smallest and coolest type of star still fusing hydrogen in its core. With masses less than half the sun's, these stars burn their fuel slowly, making them incredibly long-lived. Some could last for trillions of years. Despite being the most common stars in the galaxy, they're also some of the dimmest, which makes spotting them from Earth surprisingly difficult without a telescope. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis proposes that the language you speak shapes how you think and perceive the world. For example, if a language has no future tense, its speakers might view future events less urgently. There are two versions. The strong form says language determines thought. The weak form says it just influences it. While the stronger version is mostly rejected, the idea still fuels debate in linguistics and psychology. Gray goo is a hypothetical doomsday scenario from the early days of nanotechnology theory. The idea is that microscopic machines, if designed to self-replicate, could get out of control, converting all matter on Earth into copies of themselves. It's like runaway yeast, but with robots. First described by Eric Drexler in 1986, it's now considered highly implausible, though still useful as a cautionary tale for advanced technologies. Electrum is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, sometimes with trace amounts of copper, used as early as 600 BCE to mint the first known metal coins in Lydia, a kingdom in what is now Western Turkey. Its pale, slightly greenish hue gave these coins a distinct appearance. Since it occurs naturally, ancient mints didn't need to refine it, making electrum both convenient and prestigious. The Sakharov conditions are 3 rules that any theoretical process must meet in order to explain why the universe is made mostly of matter and not antimatter. They include violations of baryon number C and CP symmetry and departure from thermal equilibrium. Without these, the Big Bang should have produced equal parts matter and antimatter, which would have promptly annihilated each other. The Peter Principle suggests that in any hierarchy, people tend to be promoted until they reach a position where they're no longer competent. Introduced in a 1969 satirical book by Lawrence J. Peter, the idea resonated with office workers everywhere. It's not that people are bad at everything, it's just that skills for one role don't always translate to the next rung on the corporate ladder. The Osgood Schramm model of communication treats communication as a two-way, circular process. Rather than one person simply sending a message and the other receiving it, both participants continuously encode, interpret, and respond, like tossing a message back and forth. A shibboleth is any custom word or pronunciation that's used to distinguish insiders from outsiders. The term comes from a biblical story in which the pronunciation of shibboleth revealed who was from which tribe. Today, it might be a regional accent, jargon, or even a cultural reference that gives away where someone's from, or whether they belong to a certain group. The Regency crisis of 1788 unfolded when King George III of Britain experienced a severe bout of mental illness, rendering him unable to rule. Parliament debated whether his son, the Prince of Wales, should act as regent, but Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger resisted, fearing a power grab. Medium theory refers to approaches in communication studies that examine how the medium itself, not just the message, shapes human experience. Think of Marshall McLuhan's famous phrase, "The medium is the message." Whether it's print, television, or the internet, each medium alters the way we think, relate, and understand the world. Not just what we say, but how we say it, and through what channels. In 2008, researchers reverse-engineered the cryptographic algorithm used in London's Oyster card system, using nothing more than the data collected from tapping cards on readers. The MIFARE Classic chip had a vulnerability that allowed access to its encryption keys. This led to widespread discussions about transit security and digital privacy, highlighting how even a smart card for commuting can open the door to unintended consequences. A paratectic reaction occurs when a liquid and one solid phase combine to form a different solid phase as the material cools. It's common in metallurgy and crystallography, where alloy mixtures change phases at precise temperatures. For example, certain steel compositions undergo paratectic reactions during casting. The Aharonov-Bohm effect is a quantum phenomenon in which particles are influenced by an electromagnetic potential, even in regions where the actual electric and magnetic fields are zero. Imagine an electron being deflected around a magnetic field it never touches. This effect, confirmed in experiments, challenges classical assumptions and shows that in quantum mechanics, potentials themselves have physical significance, not just the fields. The Debye sheath is a thin layer that forms between a plasma and a solid surface it contacts, like a metal wall in a fusion reactor. It acts as an electrical buffer zone, where ions pile up and help balance the negative charge that typically builds on the wall. This sheath protects materials from damage, but it also makes engineering high-performance plasma systems significantly more complicated. The Byzantine generals problem is a thought experiment in computer science about how distributed systems can reach consensus even when some participants are unreliable or malicious. It's like several generals needing to coordinate an attack, but some might be traitors sending false messages. The problem inspired key advances in fault-tolerant computing and blockchain technology, where agreement is everything and trust is a luxury. Fraunhofer lines are the dark absorption bands seen in the sun's spectrum, first studied in detail by Joseph von Fraunhofer in the early 1800s. They occur because elements in the sun's cooler outer layers absorb specific wavelengths of light. By analyzing these lines, scientists identified elements like hydrogen and helium in the sun's atmosphere. It was one of the first clues that stars were made of the same stuff as Earth. The Drake equation is a way to estimate how many intelligent civilizations might be communicating in our galaxy right now. Proposed by Frank Drake in 1961, it breaks the problem into parts, like how many stars form each year, how many have planets, how many planets might support life, and so on. It doesn't give a definite answer, but frames the question scientifically. How likely are we to be alone? Orchomenus was an ancient city in Boeotia, Greece, known for its wealth during the Mycenaean era, sometimes called the Minyan Orchomenus. It rivaled Thebes and played a key role in early Greek mythology and trade. Archaeologists uncovered a Thalos tomb there, one of the largest ever found, suggesting powerful rulers once lived in this now quiet archaeological site near Lake Kopais. The path integral formulation in quantum mechanics was introduced by Richard Feynman. It says that to find the probability of a particle going from one point to another, you have to consider every possible path it could take, not just the straight line. Each path contributes a tiny wave, and the total is found by summing them all. It's like the particle exploring every route simultaneously before choosing the final one. The Battle of Trafalgar, fought in 1805, was a decisive naval clash between the British Royal Navy and the combined French and Spanish fleets during the Napoleonic Wars. Led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, the British destroyed much of the enemy fleet without losing a single ship. Nelson was killed in action, but the victory ensured Britain's naval dominance for over a century and crushed Napoleon's plans to invade England. A topological quantum computer is a theoretical kind of quantum machine that stores information in the twists and braids of particles called anyons. These anyons only exist in two-dimensional systems and follow unusual rules when they're moved around each other, because their information depends on how they've been braided, not where they are. This model could be much more resistant to error than other quantum approaches. The anthropic principle is the idea that the universe's physical laws must allow for observers like us to exist, because if they didn't, we wouldn't be here to notice. There are weak and strong versions. The weak version simply states this as a tautology, while the strong version suggests the universe is somehow compelled to develop life. Either way, it's a way of reframing why do the laws of nature seem so precise. Length contraction is a concept in special relativity where objects moving at high speeds appear shorter along the direction of motion, at least from the perspective of a stationary observer. It's not that the object physically shrinks, but rather that space and time themselves are warped by motion. For example, a spacecraft moving near light speed would look compressed, like a flattened bullet, to someone watching from Earth. The base rate fallacy happens when people ignore general statistical information, the base rate, in favor of specific information. For instance, if a medical test is 99% accurate, but the disease is rare, a positive result doesn't mean you definitely have it. People tend to focus on the result and forget how rare the condition is, leading to big overestimations of risk or probability. The ADS/CFT correspondence is a conjecture in theoretical physics that links two very different types of theories, one in a space with gravity, anti-de Sitter space, and one without it, described by conformal field theory. First proposed by Juan Maldacena in 1997, it provides a kind of mathematical dictionary between gravity and quantum mechanics, and is considered one of the most important ideas in string theory. The traditional Mongolian script is written vertically from top to bottom and left to right, a rare combination among modern writing systems. It was derived from the old Uyghur script and has been used since the 13th century. Though it was replaced by Cyrillic during the Soviet era, it's still taught and used in Inner Mongolia and is making a cultural comeback in modern Mongolia. The Little Albert experiment, conducted in 1920 by John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner, aimed to show that emotional responses could be conditioned in humans. They exposed a baby to a white rat and then paired it with a loud noise, causing fear. Eventually, the child feared the rat even without the noise. It was a landmark study in behaviorism, but also ethically troubling by today's standards. Quinine, the bitter compound in tonic water, was once the most effective treatment for malaria. Extracted from the bark of the cinchona tree, it was so crucial that British colonials in India mixed it with soda water and then added gin to make it more palatable. That mix, the gin and tonic, was born from medicinal necessity and remains one of the more refreshing side effects of disease control. The Munsell color system, developed by Albert H. Munsell in the early 20th century, organizes colors using 3 dimensions: hue, like red or green, value, how light or dark, and chroma, how vivid. It creates a sort of 3D color tree rather than a flat color wheel. Artists, designers, and soil scientists still use versions of it today because it separates color components in a way that's easy to understand and measure. A Veblen good is a product where demand actually goes up as the price increases, precisely because it's expensive. Named after economist Thorstein Veblen, It explains luxury items like designer handbags or rare watches, where part of the appeal is signaling status. It's a contradiction of basic economics, but perfectly rational if what you're buying isn't just a thing, but a social symbol. Benford's law says that in many sets of real-world numbers, the number 1 shows up as the first digit more often than 2, and so on down to 9. This strange but consistent pattern shows up in things like population sizes, stock prices, or electricity bills. It's even used to detect fraud. When data is faked, the digit frequencies often deviate from Benford's predicted curve. The Bic crystal pen has a tiny hole in the barrel. Not a design flaw, but a pressure equalizer. As ink flows, air has to move into the pen to replace it. Without that hole, the pen would eventually stop working or leak. It's a simple solution to a practical problem, and one reason this disposable pen design has remained basically unchanged since 1950. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's the real-world disaster that ended the age of dinosaurs. About 66 million years ago, an asteroid roughly 10 kilometers wide slammed into what's now Mexico, throwing dust into the atmosphere and blocking sunlight. Within years, nearly 75% of all species vanished, including the non-avian dinosaurs. In maritime law, flotsam and jetsam are not just poetic terms, they have specific meanings. Flotsam is wreckage that ends up floating after a ship sinks, while jetsam is cargo deliberately thrown overboard to lighten a ship in distress. There's also lagan, sunken cargo with a marker, and derelict, abandoned at sea. But flotsam and jetsam have drifted into common language as shorthand for discarded stuff. A pennon was a small triangular or tapering flag used by knights during the medieval period, usually attached to a lance. It identified the knight in battle and could display heraldic symbols or personal emblems. The Faraday effect is what happens when light passes through certain materials in the presence of a magnetic field. It causes the light's polarization to rotate. Discovered by Michael Faraday in 1845, it was the first experimental evidence that light and magnetism are connected, a key step toward electromagnetic theory. The Krasnikov tube is a speculative concept in general relativity for faster-than-light travel. The idea is to create a space-time shortcut by distorting the geometry of the universe along a specific path, like digging a trench through the fabric of space. It wouldn't allow a single trip to exceed light speed, but a round trip could take less time than light would need to make the same journey. A fire piston is a compact device that starts a fire using nothing but air pressure and a little physics. When the plunger is slammed into its cylinder, the air inside is rapidly compressed, heating up so fast that it ignites a bit of tinder, usually charcloth. It works on the same principle as a diesel engine's ignition. The heat death of the universe is a theoretical endgame in cosmology where everything just stops happening. It's not a fiery explosion or a dramatic collapse. Instead, the universe keeps expanding until energy is so evenly spread out that no work can be done. Stars die, particles decay, and all thermodynamic processes grind to a halt. It's the cold, quiet fade-out of all cosmic drama. In-group favoritism is the tendency to prefer people who belong to your own group, whether it's your team, culture, or even just people who like the same band. It can happen even in random group assignments, and studies show we often give more trust, empathy, or rewards to us rather than them. It's a fundamental part of social psychology and shows up everywhere, from schoolyards to geopolitics. A tontine was an 18th century financial plan that started out cooperative and turned competitive. People would pool money into an annuity, and as each member died, their share was divided among the survivors. The last person standing got it all. Solifluction is a slow, almost imperceptible type of landslide that happens when waterlogged soil oozes downhill over frozen or impermeable ground. Common in Arctic tundra and alpine environments, it looks like the land itself is sagging or rippling. Unlike a dramatic mudslide, solifluction creeps along year by year, forming lobes and terraces that geologists can read like slow-motion footprints. The Planck length is about 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35th meters, unimaginably small. So small, in fact, that the very concept of space might break down at that scale. It's thought to be the shortest measurable length in physics, beyond which quantum effects of gravity take over. If an atom were the size of the solar system, the Planck length would be about the size of a bacterium in comparison. Akrotiri is a Bronze Age settlement on the island of Santorini that was buried under volcanic ash around 1600 BCE. The eruption preserved the site so well that it's often called the Minoan Pompeii. Multi-story buildings, vibrant frescoes, and advanced plumbing systems show a remarkably sophisticated society. Yet no bodies were found, suggesting the people had warning and escaped before the disaster struck. Strongman competitions are tests of raw strength that often look more like construction work than sport. Competitors might carry massive stones, pull trucks, or hoist logs overhead. Events vary, but all require a mix of power, grip, and endurance. It's a modern evolution of feats of strength seen in traditional Highland games or Viking challenges, and still rooted in lifting things nature never intended. Creep is what happens when a solid material under constant stress very slowly deforms over time. It's why power lines droop in the summer, or why turbine blades in jet engines need to be carefully engineered. Unlike sudden failure, creep is a gradual shift, sometimes over decades. Engineers have to account for it in buildings, bridges, and pretty much anything that bears a load long term. The London equations, introduced by brothers Fritz and Heinz London in 1935, describe how superconductors respond to electromagnetic fields. They explain how superconducting currents flow without resistance and how magnetic fields are expelled from a superconductor, a phenomenon known as the Meissner effect. These equations laid the groundwork for understanding the strange, frictionless world of superconductivity. Buzkashi is a horseback sport played mainly in Central Asia, where players compete to drag a goat, or sometimes a calf, carcass across a field and into a goal. It's like polo, but with fewer rules, more chaos, and far more dust. Traditionally played by nomadic tribes, Buzkashi can last for hours and requires intense horsemanship, strategy, and strength, especially since there's no saddle to hang on to. Venera 13, launched by the Soviet Union in 1981, was the first probe to send back color panoramic images from the surface of Venus. It landed in 1982 and survived for 127 minutes in an environment hot enough to melt lead. The images showed a rocky, orange-hued landscape and were a technological triumph, especially considering that Venus crushes and cooks most spacecraft within minutes. The Stabat Mater is a 13th century Latin hymn reflecting on Mary's sorrow as she stands at the foot of the crucified Christ. The title means the mother was standing, and its emotional power has inspired composers for centuries. Pergolese's version, written in 1736 just before his death at age 26, is among the most haunting, while Dvořák's 19th century setting brings a full romantic sweep. The maelstrom of Saltstraumen, near Bodo in northern Norway, is one of the world's strongest tidal currents. About every 6 hours, nearly 400 million cubic meters of water rush through a narrow strait between fjords, reaching speeds up to 40 kilometers per hour. The result is a swirling, roaring current that looks like the ocean is boiling. Boats can, and do, navigate it, but only very carefully. The planning fallacy is our tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take, even when we've done similar tasks before. It's why construction projects run late and students start assignments the night before. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky coined the term in 1979, showing that we're often optimistic about our future selves, even in the face of past evidence. Renormalization is a set of methods in quantum field theory used to make sense of equations that would otherwise give infinite results. Physicists use it to clean up the math by redefining constants like mass or charge so that calculations agree with experiments. It's not just technical bookkeeping. Without it, theories like quantum electrodynamics would be uselessly infinite on paper. The Great Glen Fault runs diagonally across Scotland and has shaped much of its landscape, including the famous Loch Ness. It's a strike-slip fault, meaning the land on either side moves sideways past the other. It hasn't been active in recent centuries, but over millions of years it helped carve the deep valley that now slices across the highlands, linking the North Sea to the Atlantic. A coin can be both structural and decorative. Traditionally, it's the cornerstone in masonry construction, where two walls meet, and it often sticks out slightly to reinforce the joint. In classical architecture, coins are sometimes exaggerated with alternating stone sizes, adding visual interest while signaling stability. On modern buildings, they're often just for show, but still mimic the weight they once bore. Relevance theory is a model of communication developed by Dan Sperber and Deirdre Wilson in the 1980s. It argues that people interpret language by assuming speakers will provide just enough information to be relevant. No more, no less. Rather than decoding everything literally, we infer meaning based on what would make the most sense in context. It's why we get hints, jokes, or sarcasm with minimal effort. The Punic Wars were a trilogy of conflicts between Rome and Carthage from 264 to 146 BCE. They included Hannibal's famous crossing of the Alps with elephants, Rome's naval innovation, and finally, the complete destruction of Carthage. These wars transformed Rome from a regional power into a dominant empire and left behind the Latin phrase Carthago delenda est, meaning Carthage must be destroyed. A grain boundary is where two crystal structures meet in a solid material. Each side may be perfectly ordered, but where they touch, there's a misalignment. These boundaries affect properties like strength, conductivity, and corrosion resistance. In metallurgy and materials science, controlling grain boundaries can make the difference between a brittle alloy and a durable one. Think of turbine blades or skyscraper steel. The Winkel triple projection is a type of map that tries to balance three kinds of distortion: area, direction, and distance. No flat map can perfectly represent a round Earth, but the Winkel triple does a solid job of minimizing the errors all at once. That's why National Geographic adopted it in 1998. It looks wrong in fewer ways than most maps, even if Greenland still comes out a bit too big. Extortion is when someone obtains something, usually money, through coercion, threats, or abuse of power. It's different from theft because the victim technically hands the item over, but under pressure. Classic examples include blackmail, protection rackets, or threats of harm unless payment is made. The term bus and truck roadshow comes from theater lingo, referring to touring productions that weren't exactly Broadway material. These shows would travel in buses and trucks, often with scaled-down sets and lesser-known performers, hitting smaller cities and less glamorous venues. The upsilon meson is a particle made from a bottom quark and its corresponding antiquark, making it what's called flavor neutral. Its quark content cancels out in terms of charge and type. This heavy meson helped confirm the existence of the bottom quark. Click here to find out what else I found. What are you waiting for? Click it. Learn something. That's literally why you watch this channel.